Welcome back. Today we're going to be talking about multiplying integers. Our content objective is students will be able to determine the rules for multiplying integers. Language objective is students will be able to write multiplication problems as repeated addition. Why am I learning this? Well, it's important for many real-life problems like representing the total change in yards in several plays in a football game. So background knowledge. Remember, commutative property states that the order does not matter. You can flip-flop numbers around an operation. It's going to be the same. We do have it for addition as well as multiplication. Note, there isn't a commutative property for subtraction or division because the order does matter between those two operations. It only works for addition as well as multiplication. Both of those have a commutative property. Associative property is regrouping is okay. You can regroup numbers together using parentheses and it's okay. Guess what? It only works for addition as well as multiplication as well. You can regroup it. Why would people do this? Sometimes regrouping allows you to do mental math a little bit quicker. So that's when associative property is effective. So in third grade, you first learn how to do multiplication. It can be expressed three different ways. 3 times 5 like such. 3 using the multiplication dot instead, and then of course just putting them next to each other using maybe parentheses, for example. All of these represent 3 times 5, which means 3 times 5 could be thought of as 3 groups of 5. So here is a group of 5 positives repeated 3 times. So how many positives are there? 15, or you can think of it as 5 repeated 3 times like so. So this is using symbols, and this is of course using numbers, which would give you repeated addition, which would still give you 15. So there's different options. You can use symbols, and you can do repeated addition. The commutative property of multiplication allows you to switch the order. So instead of doing 3 times 5, you can do 5 times 3. It gives you the same answer. But we will think of this as 5 groups of 3. So I'm going to have a group of 3 repeated 5 times. Or you can just do 3 repeated 5 times. So 5 groups of 3. 5 times. This is symbols. This is repeated addition. Okay, so 3 plus 3 plus 3 plus 3 plus 3 is 15. 4 times negative 2. Now what does this mean? Well, here are the 3 different ways. All of them still mean 4 times negative 2. We can think of this as 4 groups of negative 2. So here, 4 groups of negative 2. So I'm going to do 2 negatives, but 4 groups of them. So what's our answer? Negative 8. So this is using symbols. But then, of course, we can use repeated addition, which would be negative 2 repeated 4 times. And notice, negative 2, there's 4 groups of it. So repeated addition, what does this give us? Negative 8. So with a number line, what would this look like? Well, it means we're going to be moving negative 2 4 times. So 4 groups of negative 2. Here's one group of negative 2, another group of negative 2. So far that's 2. 3 groups of negative 2 and 4 groups of negative 2. Well, where did that leave us? That left us at negative 8. So our answer is negative 8. So we're going to perform each of the following by using symbols, repeated addition, and a number line. So first with the symbols, what does this look like? It's 3 groups of negative 3. So I'm going to do 1, 2, 3. Here's one group, 2 groups, 3 groups. So our answer is going to be negative 9. What about 2 times 5? Well, it's 2 groups of 5. So 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Here's one group. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. There's 2 groups. Oops. These are all positive 5s. My bad. So how many positives are there? There are 10 positives. Okay, what about repeated addition? Well, it's 3 groups of negative 3, so we're going to do negative 3 plus negative 3 plus negative 3, which would give us negative 9. Or here, we're going to do 2 groups of 5, so 5 plus 5 is 10. So notice these answers match so far, and these answers match so far. That should happen no matter which method you're using. Okay, what about a number line? First, it's 3 groups of negative 3, so we're going to go negative 3 times. Here's 1, here's 2, and here's 3. So where did that leave me? That left me at negative 9. What about this one? This one's 2 groups of 5, so I'm going to go in the opposite direction. We change colors. So here it's 1 group of 5 and 2 groups of 5. So where did we leave off? 10. So notice, no matter which method we use, symbol, repeated addition, or number line, we should have ended up with the same exact answer for any of these problems, which fortunately we did. Okay, so what does this mean? Well, remember when we used to have a negative on the outside, we could have read it as the opposite. So we can read this as the opposite of 4 times 3. So what does that mean? Well, I'm going to do 4 times 3, which is 12, and we're going to take the opposite of that, which is negative 12. So how was I able to do this? Well, I was using the associative property. I was regrouping it to just do 4 times 3 first. Because in order for me to take the opposite of something, I need to figure out what that actually equals first. So I did need to do 4 times 3 first. And then from there, take the opposite of it, which gave me negative 12. Okay, so here, the opposite of 4 times 3, or negative 4 times 3, we could think of this as the opposite of 4 times 3. What's 4 times 3? It's 12. So what's the opposite of 12? Negative 12. Same thing here. We can read this as the opposite of 4 times 3. What's 4 times 3? 12. So what's the opposite of 12? Negative 12. Again here, what does this mean? Well, it means the opposite of 4 times 3. What's 4 times 3? 12. So what's the opposite of 12? Negative 12. So notice all of these are the same because they represent the same exact thing. So you can think of it as the opposite of 4 times 3 in this case. Real quickly, let's see what it looks like on a number line. Now, what could I do here? Well, there is a commutative property of multiplication, so instead of putting this negative 4 times 3, I could technically write it as 3 times negative 4, which means 3 groups of negative 4, so I can go 1 group, 2 groups, and 3 groups, and that would leave me with negative 12 as an answer, okay? Or is there another way? If you didn't see commutative property and rewrote it like so, as 3 groups of negative 4, you could have also done the opposite of 4 times 3. I'm going to do 4 groups of 3. Here's 1 group. Here's 2 groups. 3 groups. 4 groups. Oops, a little too far there. 4 groups. And then from there, we have 12, but hey, we have to take the opposite of it. So what's the opposite of 12? Well, it's in the opposite direction, which is negative 12. It shifts us all the way to the opposite end of the number line, and that would be your answer. So there's multiple ways. So it's you look at the problem and you see what you find is best for you. Some people may want to use a commutative property and rearrange it so it's 3 times negative 4 instead. Or you can just think of it as, hey, it's the opposite of 4 times 3. And then we do 4 times 3. And then once I have that, take the opposite. So notice, how do we know it's the opposite? Here is 0. This gives you 12. So we're going to go the opposite direction. Instead of going 12 to the right from 0, we're going to go the opposite and go 12 to the left of 0. And that's what gave us our negative 12. Okay, so here, what could we think of this? We can think of it as the opposite of 2 times negative 8. Or, like so, the opposite of 2 times negative 8. Using the associative property, I'm going to regroup it to do 2 times negative 8 first. That's 2 groups of negative 8, which is going to give us negative 16. But then we have to take the opposite of that. The opposite of 16 is 16. Okay, so this means the opposite of 2 groups of negative 8, which is negative 16. What's the opposite of negative 16? 16. Here, same thing. The opposite of 2 groups of negative 8, which means 2 groups of negative 8 is negative 16. What's the opposite of that? Positive 16. Same here. We can read this as the opposite of 2 times negative 8, which is 2 groups of negative 8. 2 groups of negative 8 is negative 16. What's the opposite of negative 16? It is 16. Now let's try it with a number line. So first, what we're going to do is 2 groups of negative 8. Okay, so here we're going to go 2 groups of negative 8. We're going to go down to negative 8. And that's one group. We need one more group of negative 8. That leaves us with negative 16. But wait, we have to take the opposite of that. So what's the opposite of negative 16? It's going to be a a positive 16, so it's in the opposite direction. Okay, so here it says find the product of each of the following. Prove that your answer is correct with a number line. So you want to say the product of 6 and negative 3 is blank. That is your sentence frame. So I'm going to go ahead and show you a couple, and then I'm going to have you try some by yourself. So here's what we do. First, this means 6 groups of negative 3. So we're going to start with a negative 3. We're going to do 6 groups of them. Here's one group of 3. Here's another group of 3. That's 2 so far. Here is 3 groups of 3. Here is 4 groups of 3. 5 groups of 3, and 6 groups of 3. That left me at a negative 18. So my answer would be negative 18. So I would phrase this as the product of 6 and negative 3 is negative 18. Okay, well, what about this? Well, I like to think of this as the opposite of 7 times negative 2. Notice I'm using the associative property to regroup it. So this means the opposite of, let's write this in, the opposite of, whoops, change colors there, 7 groups of negative 2. So starting with negative 2, we're going to do 7 groups of it. So here's 1 group, 2 groups, 3 groups, 4 groups, 5 groups, 6 groups, 7 groups. Oh, that's it. 7 groups of negative 2. That leaves you at negative 14. But wait a second. We have to take the opposite of that. So I'm going to go in the complete opposite direction, which would leave me to a positive 14 as my final answer. So to use a sentence frame, I would say the product of negative 7 and negative 2 is positive 14. Now, here it says find the product of each of the following. Prove that your answer is correct with the opposite multiplication. So here, let me just go ahead and show you one, and then I'll have you try one by yourself. So here, this means the opposite of 9 times 6. So notice I'm wanting to do this first before I take the opposite of it. 9 times 6 is 54, but we still have to take the opposite of that. So what's the opposite of 54? Negative 54. So you might want to rewrite it like this, and that's what would give you our negative 54. So pause the video and try number 4 by yourself. Okay, so let's try this one. Number 4 is the opposite of 7 times negative 6. Well, this means 7 groups of negative 6. If you have 7 groups of negative 6, you have a total of negative 42. But what's the opposite of negative 42? That's going to give us a positive 42. So the answer is 42. So for the very first one, I would have said the product of negative 9 and 6 is negative 54. And for number 4 here, I would say the product of negative 7 and negative 6 is 42. Okay, it says find the product of each of the following. Prove that your answer is correct by one of the following. Another number line, repeated addition, symbols, or by opposite multiplication. So I'm going to go ahead and have you pause the video. You pick whatever method you want and tell me what the product is of each number. Okay, so I'm just going to go over the answers because your method may have varied. I'm not going to show you every single type, but I will share the answer with you. Number 5, the answer should be positive 42. And number 6 should have been a negative 84. So for number 5, you should have said the product of negative 3 and negative 14 is 42. And for number 6, you should have said the product of 12 and negative 7 is negative 84. So again, for number 7 and 8, go ahead and pause the video and pick whatever method you feel most comfortable with to find what the product is. Okay, so for number 7, I would say the product of 8 and negative 12 is negative 96. And number 8, I would say the product of negative 7 and 4 is negative 28. So hopefully you got those right. If not, please feel free to move back into the video and check some of the different methods we use, whether it's a number line, repeated addition, symbols, or opposite multiplication. Okay. Now, last but not least, just go ahead and one more time pause the video and try numbers 9 and 10 by yourself. Okay, so for number 9, I would say the product of 6 and 12. Don't overthink this, boys and girls. You know what 6 times 12 is? It is 72. And number 10, I would say the product of negative 5 and negative 9 is positive 45. So have you recognized any patterns when multiplying integers? Hopefully, by now you have. Okay? If you have not, use one of the methods we have discussed today. Answer each of the following. What is 6 times 2? What is negative 6 times 2? What is negative 6 times negative 2? And what's 6 times negative 2? Go ahead. Some of you have noticed a pattern, some of you may not. Use a method. So the first one would be, of course, we know what 6 times 2 is. We can do that before we're taught this lesson. 6 times 2 is 12. Negative 6 times 2 is, negative 6 times negative 2 is positive 12. Next one, negative 6 times 2 is negative 12. And last but not least, 6 times negative 2 is negative 12. So, have you recognized any patterns yet? Let me have you take a closer look. Here, a positive times a positive was a positive. Here, a negative times a negative was a positive. Here, a negative times a positive was a negative. And here, a positive times a negative was a negative. Okay. So, what have we realized? Hopefully, you notice anytime we have a positive times a positive, that's a positive. That didn't change from before. But what if we have a positive times a negative? Then that should be a negative. Hopefully, you got that one right. Next, what if it's a negative times a positive? What was our answer? It should have been negative. And last but not least, what if it was a negative times a negative? What did we often get? It is a positive. So now that you know that, why don't you go ahead and try numbers 11 through 15 by yourself? Okay, so for number 11, a negative times a negative is a positive. Whoops. So 5 times 3 is 15. For number 12, a positive times a negative is a negative. What's 8 times 4? It is 32. Here, number 3, positive times negative is a negative. A negative times a positive is a negative. Now here, we can go in order. 2 times 3 is 6. 6 times 5 is 30. Now, could you have gone a different order? Yes, you could have done 5 times 2, which is 10. 10 times 3 is 30 still. Okay, here, notice I'm taking care of the sign before I actually do the computational portion of it, so I highly suggest you do that as well. What's a negative times a negative? It is positive. What's a positive times a positive? Positive. So here, what's 2 times 1? 2. What's 2 times 6? 12. So my answer is positive 12. Please note that you wouldn't actually type in this plus sign in front of it. We're just noting that we did look at the sign. We didn't just write down a number here. So some of you might want to do, first of all, negative times a negative is a positive. Positive times a negative is a negative. So my answer is negative. Some of you may want to do 7 times 2 first. I'm not going to do that. I think 2 times 3 is easier, which is 6. And then from there, we just multiply it by 7, which would give us a 42. Notice, because I took care of the sign, I didn't have to worry about it when I did my computations. I already said negative times negative is positive. Positive times negative is a negative. So we are able to use this because we use a commutative property. We don't have to go in order. Commutative property states that we can switch the numbers around the operation and it is okay. We're only allowed to do this with multiplication and addition. We're not allowed to do this for subtraction or division because for those particular operations, the order does matter. Okay, so background knowledge, it says write an integer for the following word phrase. A gain of 5 yards, that's plus 5. Profit of 38, that's a loss of 20 gallons, that's negative 20. A deposit of $342 is positive. A penalty of 20 points is negative 20. A profit of 38 is plus 38. A withdrawal is negative 12. 2 hours before lunch, I would consider that negative 2. And 30 degrees above 0 would be a positive 30. So some of these keywords kind of indicate whether or not your number is positive or negative. So here it says write a multiplication problem for each situation and then write the answer as a complete sentence. You borrow $7 each from 8 different friends. How much money do you owe? Well, you could think of it as, hey, if it's borrowing $7, that's -7. But for 8 different people, we're going to go ahead and multiply it by 8. So here, what's a negative times a positive? It is a negative, which gives us -56. But I got to answer the question. Would I say I owe -56? No, I would just say I owe a total of 56. So please think about the actual context and ask yourself, does your sentence make sense or not? Number 17, go ahead and pause the video and try this one by yourself. Number 17 says the temperature decreased 4 degrees per hour for 8 hours. How many total degrees did it decrease after the 8 hours? So since it decreased, that's going to be a -4. It happened for 8 hours, so I'm going to go ahead and multiply by 8. A negative times a positive is a negative, so that's going to be -32. So I'm going to say, how many degrees did it decrease after 8 hours? I'm going to say the temperature decreased a total of 32 degrees. So some of you might be wondering, how come we didn't say the temperature decreased a total of -32? Well, decrease kind of took care of the negative, so that's why I didn't have to write a -32. Number 18, again, pause the video and try this one by yourself. Number 18 says, during a recent deep sea dive, you descended 5 feet every minute. How many feet did you descend in 12 minutes? Well, since you're descending 5 feet every minute, I'm going to say that's a -5. You did descend for a total of 12 minutes, so you're going to multiply by a 12. So a negative times positive is a negative, so it's going to be -60. So I would say, how many feet did you descend? You descended a total of 60 feet. So again, you notice you're not saying I descended a total of -60. You're just saying 60 because the descended kind of takes care of the negative sign here. Well, guess what? That is concluding the lesson for today. Thank you so much for tuning in, and as always, until next time, bye.